Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're not a noble lady in silk or a cloistered nun humming Latin hymns. No, you're something far less celebrated. You're a medieval midwife, the village witch but not a witch, the one they send for when the screaming starts and the blood won't stop. You don't have a license, you don't have clean hands. What you have is a handful of dried herbs, a vague memory of someone else doing this once, and the bone-deep knowledge that if the baby dies, you die with it. If not literally, then socially, spiritually, and on a bad day, publicly. You're essential and expendable. So before the next knock on the door jolts you out of bed, another barefoot husband in the rain begging you to come quickly, please. Leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what ungodly hour it is. I love knowing whose insomnia I'm keeping company. And if you'd like early access to more grim bedtime stories like this, plus other perks like ad-free audio of these episodes, there's a link to the Patreon down in the description. But for now, lie back. Try not to think about the smell of blood and boiled cabbage. Let's begin. You didn't set out to become a midwife. No little girl in your village ever did. There weren't stories about brave midwives galloping through the mud to save lives, or tales of saintly women honoured for coaxing infants into the world. There were no songs, no prayers, no books, only blood and silence. Maybe your mother did it before you, and before her, someone else, though no one ever talked about it directly. One day, you helped lift a bleeding woman off a straw pallet, and by the next, someone was calling you wise as if instinct alone counted for experience. That's how it starts, not with ambition, with obligation, or maybe accident. You were young when they handed you your first bowl of boiling water and told you to hold down a screaming girl's legs while the baby came. You tried not to look. You failed. The screaming didn't stop when the baby arrived. The baby didn't cry. The mother did. A lot. No one explained what to do with the afterbirth. So you stood there, frozen, holding a towel that soaked through in seconds. Later, they said you had the stomach for it. That was the first lie. You just didn't run. That was enough. No one ever gave you a proper name for the job. Some called you a healer, some a witch. Most just said, her or that one, when pointing in your direction. You were young, unmarried, and unlucky. The holy trinity of suspicion. But the births kept coming, and the women kept screaming, and the elders kept sending them to you. Eventually, they stopped asking if you wanted to help and started expecting it. That's the thing about being a woman in the Middle Ages. Once you show you're useful, you never get to rest again. You didn't get any real training. What you had was passed down in murmurs and panic. Someone once showed you how to check for a heartbeat using the flat of your hand against the belly. Someone else showed you how to grind up a root that made the pain worse, but made the mother feel like it didn't. There was a recipe for a salve to ease tearing. You never wrote it down because you never learned to write. Instead, you remembered it by smell. Sage, vinegar, sheep's tallow, and something bitter you still can't name. It worked, sort of, when the cuts weren't too deep. There's no uniform. You wear what you own, which is to say, not much. Usually, it's a woolen shift stained at the hem and too thin at the elbows, tied with a belt of fraying cord. You keep a pouch tied at your waist with your few precious tools, a sliver of bone used for cutting cords, a tiny iron needle for stitching, dried mint leaves wrapped in cloth, and a talisman you won't admit you believe in. You clean what you can, when you can, with water that's never really clear and soap that burns more than it cleans. Your first solo birth happened too soon. They told you another woman would be there to help, but by the time you arrived, it was already too late. The mother was young, soaked in sweat, eyes wide with terror, no husband in sight. He'd been carted off to war or plague or the tavern, no one knew. Her screams were thin and desperate. You held her hand, then her legs, then her body as it seized. The baby came, blue, lifeless. You tried to rub it, slap it, breathe into it like you'd heard. Nothing. The mother bled too much, too fast. You stuffed linen into her, It didn't matter. She died staring straight at you. No one blamed you, not allowed, but they didn't look at you the same after that. You didn't either. That was the night you stopped sleeping through till morning. That was the night you stopped believing the gods watched over women at all. Eventually, you got better. Not smarter. There's only so much you can learn from watching women die, but faster. You could tell from a glance if a baby was positioned wrong, if the labour would last hours or days, if the mother would likely tear or rupture, or just stop breathing halfway through. You learned how to brace your back for the effort of lifting limp bodies off blood-soaked sheets. You learned how to listen for the sound of death in the cries of the living. You learned that if you wept every time a baby didn't make it, you'd drown before your 20s. You weren't special. That's the thing. Midwives were everywhere. In villages, in cities, in forests. Some were revered, some were reviled. Most were both depending on the weak. Some midwives prayed before each birth, others cursed. Some kept charms, others swore by St. Margaret or by the moon, or by nothing at all. You never got to be just one thing. You were doctor, priestess, butcher, therapist, scapegoat. When the baby lived, they thanked God. When the baby died, they looked at you. And yet, somehow, you stayed. Maybe because there was no one else. Maybe because the screams kept coming. Or maybe because, in some bitter, broken corner of yourself, you believed that someone should be there. That someone should hold their hand. That someone should at least try, even if it cost everything. That's how you ended up here. Not chosen, not ordained. Just a body that didn't flinch. A girl who didn't say no fast enough. You were never meant to be a midwife. But now, you're the only one they have, and they need you, until they don't. You've got no training, no written guide, and certainly no degree. What you do have is a cloth pouch of hastily gathered tools, a deeply unreliable set of memories, and the persistent sense that you're about to be asked to fix something unfixable. Again. You don't even have gloves. That concept hasn't really arrived yet. If you've got clean hands, it's because it rained on the way over. Everything else you're carrying, tools, rags, herbs, has been used before. Washed, if possible. Prayed over, if desperate. Mostly you operate on instinct. That and the collective folklore of every woman in a 10-mile radius who's ever bled on a straw mattress. Inside your kit, and kit is a generous word for a bundle of things tied up in the corner of your apron. You've got a few precious objects. A knife with a blade that's seen better decades. You sharpen it on stone when you remember, but the edge is still uneven. A coil of coarse linen, torn into strips and reused more often than you'd like to admit. A curved sliver of bone, honed for cutting cords. A bundle of dried herbs wrapped in old cloth. Yarrow for bleeding, rue for cramps, comfrey for tears, and a bit of mint to chew on so you don't throw up from the smell. There's a tiny wooden spoon for administering tinctures and a pinch of powdered charcoal in case someone swallows something they shouldn't have. You don't have a chart, a list, or anything resembling documentation. Everything you know is stored between your ears, and it's always just a little out of reach when you need it most. You rely on the body. Not anatomy exactly. No one's ever shown you a diagram or taught you the names of bones. You've never dissected a corpse or peered into a uterus by candlelight. But you felt things. You've learned by touch. You know the soft swell of a baby in the womb, how it shifts under your palm. You can guess the angle of the head from the shape of the belly. You can smell a coming fever. You can hear the difference between ordinary moaning and the kind that means something inside is about to tear. Your knowledge isn't scientific. It's survival. Yours and theirs. There's no protocol, no standardized procedure. Every woman is different, and every birth throws a new disaster at your feet. One day, the baby arrives in under an hour, slippery and pink and breathing before you can even set down your bag. The next, the mother labours for 2 days straight, tearing herself apart with each contraction. And when the baby finally arrives, it's silent. You don't get advance warning. No ultrasounds, no blood pressure checks. You just walk into the room, take a deep breath, and hope you won't have to choose who to save. Sometimes the baby comes too early and it's smaller than your forearm. You wrap it anyway, knowing it probably won't make it through the night. Sometimes it's too large and the mother's body can't accommodate it. You try turning it gently with your bare hands, whispering apologies as the woman screams into her blanket. You've learned to recognise when a cord is wrapped around a baby's neck. You've learned the signs of stillbirth, a belly too quiet, too low. You never say it out loud, not until it's over. The panic is constant, not loud, not dramatic, just a low, buzzing anxiety that lives in your gut and never leaves. Every cry, every gush of blood, every moment of stillness stretches into dread. You move on instinct, but that instinct is stitched together from terror and repetition. You've seen too many things go wrong, too fast, too senselessly. You know better than to feel confident. Confidence gets people killed. So you stay alert, you stay quiet, and you work fast because sometimes that's the only thing standing between a woman and death. And it's not just the physical tools that are lacking, it's the knowledge. Half of what you know you learned from someone else, who learned it from someone else, going back who knows how far. Some of it's true, some of it's not. You've watched a woman die after being forced to lie still on her back, something you now only allow in the final moments. You've ignored the older women who insisted on tying string around the labouring woman's thighs to keep the baby from falling out. You've seen potions meant to speed labour nearly kill the mother instead. Every time something doesn't work, you try to remember. Every time something does, you don't trust it fully. Just because it worked once doesn't mean it will again. People like to think of midwives as calm, nurturing presences, all wisdom and gentle hands. But you know better. There's no serenity in a birthing room. There's just noise and fluid, and the knowledge that any second could be your last moment of control. You are part healer, part butcher, part priest. You whisper prayers you don't believe in, while packing herbs into open wounds. You cut cords with shaking hands, while chanting someone else's rituals. You mutter reassurances that mean nothing, while praying the baby doesn't come out backward. And the truth is, your tools aren't meant for healing. They're meant for triage. You're not working with the intention of curing. You're trying to minimize damage. Keep the woman alive. Keep the baby breathing. Keep your own head above the flood of panic that threatens to drown the whole room. You don't expect perfection. You don't even expect safety. You just hope for survival. Theirs, yours, anyone's. And when it's over, when the baby is swaddled and the mother is breathing shallow but steady, you pack your tools back into the pouch. You rinse your hands if water's available. You thank whatever force didn't let this one end in tragedy. And then you walk home, knowing another knock on your door could come at any hour. Another birth, another gamble, another night of hope, herbs and sheer, unrelenting panic. You learn quickly that no one remembers the ones you get right. The clean births, the quick labours, the babies who cry before you've even wiped the blood from your hands. Those disappear into the background. No one celebrates you. No one brings bread or thanks you in church. They say, God was merciful, as if he dropped by to do your job for you. But the moment something goes wrong, and it always does, eventually, your name is the first to be whispered and the last to be forgiven. You could do everything right. Wash your hands, say the prayers, give the right herbs in the right doses at the right time. You could turn the baby carefully, keep the mother warm, monitor her breath and pulse and skin. You could hold her hand and tell her to push and whisper that it'll be over soon, even if you know it might not. But if she bleeds too much, and women do, it doesn't matter. You'll be the one standing over the body when her husband walks in. You'll be the one holding the child that cries while the mother never will again. And when the baby is still born, when it comes out blue and quiet with the cord wrapped twice around its neck, when it never draws a breath, no matter how long you rub its chest or whisper its name, you'll see it in their faces. Suspicion, Grief that looks a lot like accusation. They won't say it immediately. They might even pretend to thank you. But the next time they pass you in the square, they'll look away. The next time their cousin goes into labour, they'll send for someone else. You try to explain sometimes. Try to tell them the baby was already gone when you arrived, or that the mother had been labouring for too long before they called you. But explanations sound like excuses. People don't want medicine. They want miracles, and when you can't give them that, they'll call you a monster, or a failure, or a curse. And the worst part is, you sometimes believe them. You've done things in those moments that you never speak of. Pressed your hands hard into a hemorrhaging womb, whispering apologies through gritted teeth, stuffed herbs and linen deep inside a dying woman, hoping to stop the flood of blood, sliced open a cord with your teeth when your knife wasn't fast enough, sat beside a woman for hours as she moaned and begged for it to end, until finally it did. Not the labour, but her life. And then wrapped the baby in your shawl, unsure whether to cry, scream or stay silent. You carry those memories like stones in your pockets. Some are heavy with guilt, others are sharp with helplessness. A few are just blank, moments so terrifying that your brain refuses to store them in detail. But every time someone dies, the same question rises in your throat. Was it my fault? Did I wait too long? Did I give the wrong route? Did I touch something I shouldn't have? Was there something else I could have done? You don't get answers, only stares and silence and rumours that slither through the village like smoke under a door. People start asking whether you used the right prayers, whether you forgot the holy oil, whether that necklace you wear has something dark bound up in it, and you want to scream that none of those things matter, that sometimes babies die, and sometimes mothers die, and sometimes everything dies, no matter how much you pray or rub or scream. But you don't. You swallow it, because rage makes people more certain that you're a witch. You start keeping a mental list, not of the births you've done, but of the ones that went badly. You replay them at night, sorting through the details like a butcher examining a carcass for rot. That one bled too fast, that one never turned. That one was already fevered before you arrived. It doesn't make you feel better, but it helps you brace for the next one. Helps you pretend you're learning, as if learning could make a difference when you're working with broken tools, and dirt floors, and desperation. And still, you go when they call. You go knowing that if something happens, you'll be blamed. That if the baby comes out too soon, or too late, or too cold, you'll be the reason. That if the mother screams too loudly, they'll say you caused her pain. That if she dies, they'll ask what you did to her. You go anyway. Because someone has to. Because leaving a woman to give birth alone is worse. Because despite everything, there's still a small part of you that believes you can help. But it wears you down. The weight of it. The knowledge that every successful birth is just one less failure, not a victory. That every life you bring into the world is one step closer to the moment you won't be able to. You start seeing ghosts in the faces of the living. You start flinching when babies cry because you remember the ones who didn't. You start avoiding the market, the church, the well, places where the mothers gather and speak softly behind their hands. And sometimes, when you're alone, you wonder what it would take for them to turn on you. Not just whisper, not just look away, but really turn. You think about the stories you've heard. Women dragged before priests, accused of sorcery because they failed to save a lord's daughter. Women forced to confess to consorting with demons because 3 stillbirths happened in the same season. You wonder if your name is already being passed around like a curse. And then, the next night, someone knocks on your door. A man with panic in his eyes and dirt on his boots. His wife is in labour. It's early. The baby isn't moving. And he needs you. Needs you. As if nothing's ever gone wrong. As if the last mother didn't die with your name on her lips. And you go. Of course you go. Because it's not about blame, not in that moment. It's about a woman screaming in a dark room, and a child who may or may not live, and the fact that you're the only one willing to walk into that blood-soaked gamble and try. Even though you know, deep down, if it goes wrong again, Your name will be the first one they curse. There is no such thing as a clean birth. Not here, not now. Not when the walls are made of rough, untreated timber, and the air inside the house is thick with the stench of damp wood, rotting straw, and smoke from a hearth that never quite stops smouldering. The birthing room, if you can call it a room, is just a corner of a one-room cottage, separated by a curtain or a piece of hanging cloth if they're fancy. Most times, it's just you, the mother, a pile of old linens, and whatever livestock had the decency to stay outside. You don't complain about the smell anymore. You've grown used to the layers of it. Stale sweat, urine, blood, and something worse that always seems to cling to the walls long after the birth is over. You've long since given up on the idea of antiseptic. That word doesn't even exist in your world. Cleanliness is measured not by sterility, but by whether the dog's been chased out of the house and the chamber pot has been emptied. If it hasn't, you'll just work around it. You've delivered babies next to piles of turnips. You've crouched in corners where mould climbs the walls like ivy. You've slipped in blood on uneven stone floors and pretended not to notice because there's no time to care. You wash your hands with vinegar if it's available. Sometimes you scrape them with salt or ash. Most of the time, it's just water. Muddy, lukewarm, and more symbolic than sanitary. The mother lies on a mattress stuffed with straw that hasn't been changed in a season. It creaks with every movement, sending up little puffs of dust and mites. The sheets, if there are any, are threadbare and already stained from births past. No one thinks to boil them. Boiling requires fuel, and fuel costs money, and the baby doesn't care if the sheets are clean. Or so they say. You do what you can, you change what you're given, you spread clean cloths if you have them, or you use your own shawl. Not because it's effective, but because it feels like something. There's no standard position for birth. Sometimes the mother squats over a stool. Sometimes she lies flat on her back, moaning into a bundle of cloth. Sometimes she grips your arm so hard you can feel the bruises blooming beneath your skin. And always, always, there's the noise. Not just the screaming, though there's plenty of that, but the wet, animal sounds of the body tearing itself open. The gurgle of fluid, the slap of blood hitting the floor, the low hum of others in the room trying not to panic. You breathe it all in. There's no escaping it. No fresh air, no ventilation. Just smoke from the fire, fear, and the iron-rich scent of a womb emptying itself into the world. Your clothes are always stained, even when you've washed them, even when they're clean. You try not to wear your only decent shift to births, but sometimes there's no choice. Sometimes the labour starts in the middle of the night, and you go as you are. You bring a spare apron if you remember. You keep a rag tucked into your belt for wiping your hands, your tools, the mother's brow. You rarely use it for all three, but in an emergency, everything becomes multi-purpose. You've wiped blood off your arms with the hem of your own dress. You've used your sleeve to catch afterbirth. You've stuffed rags into tears, pressed your palms over ruptures, and said the same quiet prayer every time. Please, not this one, not today. There's no time to clean properly between births, no system for sanitizing. You rinse your tools in hot water when it's available. If not, you wipe them off and hope. You've asked families for boiled water before, only to have them laugh or stare at you like you're making things complicated. It's just a baby, someone once said. They don't need boiled water. That baby died a week later, feverish and silent. No one blamed the water. They blamed the wind, or the devil, or you. Sometimes there are helpers, women who've given birth themselves and think that makes them experts. They mean well. They mop the floor with rags that haven't been wrung out. They feed the mother broth from a cup that hasn't been washed since last winter. They hand you linens that still smell like mildew and tell you it's fine because they've been hanging by the fire. You nod and take what you're given. There's no room for pride in a room like this, just function. After the baby is born, after the cord is cut and the mother has either passed out or passed away, you do what little you can to restore order. You gather the bloodied cloths and soak them if there's water. You wipe the child clean with something soft and vaguely dry. You check the mother for bleeding. You sit in the mess and wait. Wait for the pulse to steady, for the baby to latch, for the tension to fade from the room like smoke after a storm. Sometimes that moment never comes. You've slept in these rooms before. Curled up next to the fire on a heap of discarded blankets, breathing in the afterbirth stench and hoping the rats don't get too curious. You've gone home with blood on your shoes and vomit on your hands. You've walked through town just after sunrise, crusted with bodily fluids, and watched people cross the street rather than meet your eye. You don't blame them. You probably reek of mortality, and no one wants to smell that on their way to morning prayer. This filth, this ever-present, clinging filth, becomes a part of you. You stop flinching at the sight of blood. You stop gagging when the smell of sweat and feces mixes in the heat of a closed room. You breathe through your mouth, and then eventually stop noticing. You don't stop caring, but you stop reacting. It's the only way to survive. Because if you waited for a clean room, or clean tools, or a clean conscience, no one would ever be born. And so you keep working, in dirt, in shadow, in rooms that feel more like stables than places where life should begin. You wipe your hands on the least soiled cloth you can find. You whisper comfort to women soaked in their own blood. And you do your best, because even though you live in the filth you deliver in, even though you know it will never change, someone has to catch the baby, even if no one thanks you for it. You wake up most mornings knowing your life could end with a whisper. Not a scream, not an accusation shouted in public, just a whisper. From a neighbour who saw you collecting herbs at dusk, from a mother-in-law who didn't like how you touched her daughter's belly, from a priest who thinks your work strays a little too close to playing God. You're not called a witch, not yet, but the word hangs in the air just behind your name, waiting for the right moment to stick. All it takes is one bad birth, one baby that doesn't cry, one woman who bleeds too long, one prayer that doesn't work. That's all it takes to turn you from midwife to monster. You know too much. That's the problem. You know when a woman is pregnant before she does. You know how to ease a contraction with a poultice and a muttered charm. You know which herbs stop bleeding and which ones stop pregnancies. And worse, you don't always explain how you know. You say what needs to be said. You do what needs to be done. You don't bother offering justifications for every leaf, every whisper, every drop of tincture. Because the truth is you don't always know why it works. You just know that it does. And that's more than most men can handle. To the church, you're a walking contradiction. A woman with power. A woman with knowledge. A woman who makes life. And sometimes sees death without asking a priest for permission. That makes them nervous. You've read nothing. You've been ordained by no one. And yet you speak with authority. You touch things they won't. You enter rooms they forbid. And you survive. Mostly. That survival alone is suspect. To them, it suggests sorcery. Or worse, autonomy. Sometimes you mumble when you work. Words handed down from other women. Rhythms that soothe the mother and keep your own panic at bay. You don't even know what some of them mean anymore. They're not incantations, not really. Just habit. But to someone watching from the corner, sweating through their superstition, it sounds like you're summoning something dark. If the birth goes well, no one cares. But if it doesn't, if the baby is still, or the mother shrieks too loudly, or the candle goes out unexpectedly, those same words become evidence. Proof that you're not just a healer, you're something else, something dangerous. You've seen it happen before. A midwife in the next village, blamed for a string of miscarriages. She was old, hunched, sharp-tongued. People always said she looked off. Then one winter, 3 babies were born, dead. They called the priest. He came clutching a Bible like a blade, asked her what spirits she prayed to, asked what herbs she gave the mothers, asked why she had so many bones hanging from her doorway, Never mind they were chicken bones. Never mind they were there to keep foxes out. She was gone within the week. No trial, no burial, just gone. You didn't know her well, but you remember her hands, steady, cracked, stained from years of catching life and cleaning death. You remember how she once gave you a vial of oil that smelled like cloves and said it would help ease pain. You never got to ask what was in it. You threw it in the river the day after she disappeared, just in case someone decided to search your home next. You've learned to hide things, to speak softly, to let others take credit when a birth goes well, to thank God loudly and often, even when you know He had nothing to do with it. You wear a small wooden cross, even though it means nothing to you. You let the priest bless the child, even when the mother is still bleeding out. You nod when people tell you it was divine will that saved the baby, not your hands, not your herbs, not your sleepless nights spent coaxing a new life from a dying body. But you still feel the eyes, at the market, at the well, at the edge of the churchyard, where you rarely walk too close. They watch you like you might erupt into flames, like your shadow might move the wrong way, like your touch might curse their children. Some women are grateful to you, others are scared of you. Most are both. They need you, but they'll never quite trust you. Not when you can speak calmly in the face of death. Not when you know which plants end life instead of beginning it. Not when you walk into a room full of screaming and leave with silence. It doesn't help that you're often alone, unmarried or widowed or strange. Maybe you never had children of your own. Maybe you did, and they died. Either way, it makes people wonder. They ask why a woman with no family keeps tending to other people's. They wonder what you get out of it. They suspect it's not charity. They suspect it's power. And they're right, but not the way they think. You don't want control, you want to help. You want to protect. But power makes people nervous when it's in the hands of someone they can't punish easily. And if you're poor, which you are, that makes you even more vulnerable. No man will step forward to defend you. No one will pay your way out of a trial. If the priest or the lord or the steward decides you're a threat, you won't get a chance to explain. You'll be tied to a chair and asked whether the devil speaks to you in dreams. You'll be forced to name the herbs you use and why. You'll be told that every drop of blood spilled under your hands was a sin. You'll be told to confess. And even if you do, it won't save you. So you stay careful. You smile more than you want to. You keep your voice low. You hand out blessings you don't believe in and keep your real knowledge tucked behind your teeth. You let people think you're lucky or that your hands are touched by grace. You let them believe whatever makes them feel safe, because the second they feel unsafe, you become the danger. You become the threat. You become the reason bad things happen. Midwife today, witch tomorrow. All it takes is one bad day, and you've had plenty already. You're used to people looking at you sideways, but the church doesn't just look, it watches. Judges, records, men in robes with soft hands and sharper eyes have taken a particular interest in your work, even though they'll never do it themselves. They don't attend births. They don't wash blood from the thighs of dying women. They certainly don't hold stillborn infants and weep quietly when no one's looking. But they have a lot of opinions. And more importantly, they have power, which means your life is now subject to a list of regulations written by men who would faint if they saw a real placenta. To the church you're necessary, but barely, an unavoidable part of an unavoidable process. They'd rather births happen without you, or without any women at all if they had their way. But since that's not an option, they do the next best thing. They try to control you. They write edicts. They pass decrees. They send men with parchment and cold eyes to inform you that you're not to speak certain prayers unless a priest is present, that you're not to administer last rites, that you are forbidden from performing baptisms, except when a child is moments from death, in which case you are not only allowed but expected to do it perfectly, in Latin, with proper form, while kneeling in the muck and holding a dying baby in one hand and holy water in the other. And if you get it wrong, if your Latin falters, if your fingers slip, if the water isn't blessed properly, or the timing isn't just right, they'll say the child's soul is lost. And that's on you, not the parents, not the priest who wasn't there. You, because in their eyes, you're not just delivering bodies, you're delivering souls. And if one of those souls ends up in limbo, it's because your hands weren't holy enough. They don't trust you. Not really. How could they? You've seen the inside of women. You've touched the sacred made messy. You've watched what they call a miracle unfold in screams and blood and torn flesh. You know the miracle is mostly survival. You've seen the look on a mother's face when the baby won't latch, or when the bleeding won't stop, or when the cord snaps and the child is already cold. That kind of knowledge makes men uncomfortable, especially men who claim to speak for God. So they make rules. You're not allowed to speak certain phrases. You're not allowed to teach other women unless you get approval from someone higher up, which usually means someone who thinks childbirth is too indecent to even talk about. You're not allowed to perform any spiritual duties unless the child is dying. And even then, you're expected to inform the priest immediately afterward, so he can decide whether your actions were acceptable. They call it oversight. You call it surveillance. There's a specific kind of baptism they've invented just for you. Emergency baptism. You've been taught the words, or rather, told which words not to forget. You must say them exactly. I baptize thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. If the baby dies before you get through it, that's a soul lost. If the water wasn't clean enough, lost. If you were too panicked to say the words properly, lost. And again, that's your fault. And it's always babies. The church is obsessed with babies, not mothers. If a mother dies, it's a tragedy, but a manageable one. A woman's soul can still be sorted after the fact. But an unbaptized baby? That's a problem. A theological inconvenience. A dead infant is heartbreaking. A dead unbaptized infant is a scandal. That's what they say when they arrive. All frowns and folded hands, asking whether you perform the rites. They don't ask if you tried to save the mother. They ask if you saved the soul. You've lost count of how many infants you've baptized in desperation, gasping, pale, still slick with birth and blood, your fingers trembling as you dipped them in a bowl of water that may or may not have been blessed, whispering the words while praying no one was watching too closely. You've performed more baptisms than most priests in your village, and yet if anyone finds out, they'll accuse you of overstepping, of taking on roles that aren't yours, of pride. It doesn't matter that you're the only one there when it happens. It doesn't matter that the baby would die unblessed without you. The church doesn't like that kind of initiative. It wants obedience. And midwives are rarely obedient, not because you're rebellious, though sometimes you are, but because the work demands speed, urgency, blood-soaked decisions made in flickering candlelight. You don't have time to wait for a priest when a woman is dying in front of you. You don't have time to check with a bishop when the baby is choking on amniotic fluid. You act, because if you don't, someone dies, but every time you do, you take a risk. Every unsanctioned act, every whispered blessing, every emergency baptism, it's one more stone for someone to throw at you later. If a priest decides to make an example of you, they won't care how many babies you saved. They'll care about how many lines you crossed. And they'll make sure everyone remembers the one child who wasn't baptized correctly, not the dozen who lived because of your hands. You've learned to walk a fine line, to smile at the priest even when he questions your methods, to let him believe he knows more about childbirth than you do, even when he's never been in the same room as one. You nod when he scolds you for speaking Latin without permission. You agree when he says God should be the true midwife, and you don't ask whether God would have showed up in time to stop the bleeding. You've hidden herbs, you've buried tools, you've burned bits of cloth soaked in holy water and guilt. You've done what you had to do to keep the church at bay, because you know they don't need real proof. Just a reason, a rumour, a complaint, a stillborn baby and a priest with a grudge, That's all it would take. They say you're doing God's work, but they never treat you like it. You are the only thing standing between a labouring woman and death, and still no one treats you like you're important. Not really. You might be needed, yes, summoned in a panic, begged for at midnight, called a saint when things go well, but you're not respected. Not in the way men are. Not in the way priests and physicians and local officials are, with their titles and robes and freedom to fail without consequence. You're just the one they send for, when blood starts soaking through the bedding and screaming fills the house. The one who shows up, kneels in the filth, and tries to keep another woman from slipping into the ground before sunrise. The truth is your patients are disposable. Their lives are brief, their pain expected, and their deaths explained away with phrases like God's will and she was always a weak one. You've seen it too many times. A mother of 6, dead after delivering her 7th. A girl of 15, her body too small to birth the child forced into her. A woman in her 40s, deemed too old to survive labour, but still expected to bear one more heir. They die quietly, most of them. Not in the sense of actual silence, the screaming is endless, but quietly in the way the world forgets them as soon as the blood dries. No one writes down their names. No one carves their likeness into stone or preserves their memory in a book. The men keep records of livestock, taxes and weather patterns, but not of mothers, not of births unless the child is noble, and not of deaths unless someone important is inconvenienced. These women lived, bled, and died in rooms so small you could touch both walls with outstretched arms. You were there. You remember their faces, their last words, their prayers spoken between contractions, but no one else will. And that's the part that gnaws at you in the quiet hours. Not just that they died, but that they're already gone in every way that matters. You try to save them anyway. You fight for them with your bare hands, with rags and whispered charms and herbal compresses. You press down on wounds that won't stop bleeding. You spoon broth into mouths that can barely swallow. You hold babies against chests gone cold and beg them to cry, as if sound could bring back what's been lost. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, no one blames the men who left them pregnant and malnourished. They blame the woman for being too weak, too sinful, too stubborn. Or they blame you. It's hard to feel powerful when everything you do is so fragile. You have no legal rights. You own little or nothing. You live where you can, earn what people offer, and spend every waking moment on the edge of disaster. You don't carry authority, you carry responsibility. The kind that crushes your ribs and steals your sleep. The kind that clings to you like the smell of iron and smoke. And you have to keep going, even when you know the odds are against you, because no one else is going to try. The women you help are no better off. They enter childbirth knowing they might not leave it. They're told to pray, to keep their legs closed until the priest arrives, to trust in divine mercy. But mercy doesn't come often. What comes is pain. Prolonged, blinding, bone-splitting pain. They scream, and people call it normal. They beg for help, and people call it drama. They die, and people call it fate. You've watched a woman split from hip to hip while her husband stood outside, complaining that the stew was cold. You see all of it. The loneliness, the fear, the raw desperation in their eyes when the labour stretches too long. You hear the whispered confessions, the babies they lost before, the beatings they took, the prayers that never worked. You learn to read the tremble in their voices when they ask if the baby is moving, if the pain is too much, if the blood means it's already over. And you answer the same way every time, gently, calmly, even if you're not sure, because they need someone to believe in, and you're the only one there. But even as you try to help, you're reminded of your own helplessness. There are so many things you can't fix. You can't undo poverty. You can't unstarve a body weakened by months without enough food. You can't regrow tissue once it's torn apart. You can't force a man to care about the woman he impregnated. You can't stop infection once it starts. You can't stop death, not always. And you can't stop the world from turning away, like it didn't just swallow another mother whole. And sometimes, despite everything, you find yourself angry at the women too. Not because it's their fault, but because they don't fight. Because they apologise for screaming. Because they thank the priest who arrives too late. Because they think they deserve the pain. You want to shake them, scream that this isn't justice, that childbirth shouldn't be a death sentence, but you don't. Because deep down, you know they don't have a choice. And neither do you. You scream metaphorically against a tide of indifference. You scream with your hands, your effort, your refusal to walk away when things go bad. But it's hard. The tide doesn't care. The world doesn't stop to count the women lost in the margins. You're fighting for people no one else values. Not the church, not the scribes, not the men who make the laws or break them. And some days, it feels like trying to plug a flood with your bare fingers. Still, you do it, over and over again. Because if you don't, who will? The women you help may be powerless, but that doesn't mean they're unworthy. They are the ones who hold the world together. The ones who raise it, feed it, birth it, bury it. They are the ones who suffer in silence, so others can live in peace. And even if you have no monument, even if no one remembers your name or theirs, you remember. You were there, you tried. And even if that's not enough, even if you're powerless too, you'll keep going. Because somewhere out there right now, another woman is screaming in the dark, and you're the only one who knows how to listen. There's no school for this, no parchment scrolls etched with diagrams, no formal training sessions in neat candlelit rooms. What you know, you've learned the hard way, in the dark, with blood on your hands, and a woman screaming beneath you. Your education was not handed down in books. It was whispered through cracked teeth by women just as terrified as you were, passed along in half-remembered fragments, and practiced in rooms where the walls were too thin and the risks were too high. Trial and error is your curriculum, and the tuition is usually pain. You learned what a womb feels like by placing your palm on swollen bellies and guessing. You learned the difference between a child ready to be born and one already gone by touch alone. No one ever showed you a chart of female anatomy. You discovered the shape of the cervix by brushing against it during labour and watching the mother flinch. You found the edge of the uterus by accident, pressing too hard while trying to feel the baby's position. Sometimes it felt like a hard melon, other times like a waterlogged rag, always shifting, always uncertain. You don't know the names of the bones and muscles, only what they feel like when they break, tear, or give up. Your first encounter with a breech baby came in the worst way, alone at night, in a cottage where the shutters rattled and the air reeked of fear. The mother had been pushing for hours. When the baby finally appeared, it wasn't the head but a foot, tiny, blue, limp. You froze, then moved. You'd seen it once before. Not a lesson, but a disaster, and did what you remembered someone else doing. Reach in, turn gently, pray under your breath. You pulled carefully, feeling the fragile spine twist in your grasp. The baby lived. For a while, long enough to scream, long enough for you to think you'd done something right, even if the mother never recovered. Every technique you know is borrowed, stolen really, from old women who let you observe, from younger ones who made it up as they went, from trial after painful trial, where the only rule was, don't let her die. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. You kept mental notes, not about what was right, but about what didn't kill them last time. There's no such thing as a best practice, there's just slightly better guesses. And gossip. You'd be surprised how much you've learned from the things women mutter when they think you're not listening. Someone says their cousin was saved by a hot compress laced with mustard seed. Someone else swears by pressing garlic cloves to the soles of the feet to bring down a fever. Another swears a breech baby can be coaxed into position if you sing the right song near the belly. You don't believe most of it, but you try everything once. Because when you're the only one trying, You can't afford to be picky. You've learned to read bodies like stories written in bruises, breath patterns and twitching limbs. A too swollen belly might mean twin or death. Shallow breathing and cold fingertips might signal the body shutting down. You know the signs of tearing before they happen. The sudden tension in the mother's back, the angle of her legs, the look in her eyes that says something is about to go horribly wrong. You respond by instinct. Your hands move before your brain catches up. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it's just reflex. There are no mentors, no teachers. The closest you get is someone older letting you watch, if you're lucky, or shouting advice from across the room while they press down on a hemorrhaging woman. Most of the time, you're alone. Your mistakes are your own. So are your victories. And you don't talk about either. Not in detail. Not unless you want someone to accuse you of arrogance or heresy. You don't get to boast about saving lives. You just carry the memories quietly, letting them harden inside you like stones. And when you do talk to others, it's coded. Veiled suggestions, half jokes, warnings disguised as gossip. Don't forget the elderberry, someone might say, meaning she'll bleed if you don't act fast. Keep the back door open, might mean she might die and will need to leave quickly. You learn to translate desperation. You learn to read between lines. And sometimes you teach others, passing along your knowledge the same way it came to you. Whispered, uncertain, shaped by blood and necessity. You've seen what happens when others don't know enough. Our neighbour once insisted on delivering her daughter's baby alone. Said she'd done it 3 times herself, that she didn't need your help. The girl died, bled out before anyone even knew the baby was stuck. The mother didn't speak to you for a year, not because you failed, you weren't even there, but because your existence reminded her of her mistake. That's the kind of power you wield. Not authority, just presence. Just enough knowledge to make people resent the fact they need you. And sometimes your own knowledge fails you. Sometimes you press in the wrong place. Sometimes you misjudge how far along the labour is. Sometimes you give the wrong route or the wrong dose or the wrong word of comfort. You don't always know why it goes wrong. You just know that it did. And when it does, you don't get time to process it. You don't get a meeting or a review. You get a burial, a silence, a door closed a little too hard the next time you visit. Still you keep going, because you've seen what happens when there's no one, because guessing is better than doing nothing, because even if you never had a proper teacher, you've become one, to yourself, to others, to the desperate girls who trail behind you, asking if that's how much blood is supposed to come out. You nod, you lie when necessary, you teach when you can, and every time you save someone, really save them, it's not a victory, it's a fluke you pray you can repeat. You don't celebrate, you just take note. Add it to the growing pile of maybes, the long list of half-truths and field experiments that make up your version of medicine. Because there is no textbook. There never was. Only the bodies you've seen, the stories you've heard, and the ghosts you carry with you from one birth to the next. You're used to being blamed. It's part of the job. But there's a special kind of bitterness reserved for the times when it wasn't your fault. Not even a little. And you're still the one they point to. Enter the barber surgeons, men with sharp blades, 0 patience, and just enough training to be dangerous. They arrive in blood-stained aprons, reeking of ale and bravado, full of theories they read in a book once and haven't questioned since. Most of them have never attended a single normal birth. And yet, the moment something goes wrong, suddenly you're the one accused of interfering. You've watched them work. That is, if you can stomach calling it work. They approach childbirth like it's a battlefield. Forceps held like weapons. Hands too heavy, voices too loud. They don't speak to the mother. They speak over her. They don't listen to you. They lecture. And when things go sideways, when the baby gets stuck or the mother begins to seize, or the blood starts to pool beneath the bed, they turn to you and ask why you didn't warn them sooner, as if you hadn't been saying it for hours, as if your voice only counts once a man has echoed it. They cut when they shouldn't. They pull when they should wait. They insert iron where gentle hands would suffice. And then they wonder why the baby doesn't breathe, why the mother screams like she's being murdered, why there's so much blood. You know why. You knew the moment they walked in. But you held your tongue because contradicting them in front of others is dangerous. It marks you as difficult, uncooperative, superstitious. And those labels stick a lot faster than competent. There's no justice in who gets to fail. When a midwife loses a baby, it's a scandal. When a barber surgeon does, it's a learning experience. He writes about it. He draws little diagrams with cheerful labels and inaccurate anatomy. He publishes a treatise full of confidently wrong advice and becomes famous in cities he's never been to. Meanwhile, you bury another mother and pray the family doesn't decide to accuse you of witchcraft. He gains reputation. You gain suspicion. You've lost count of how many births you've handled on your own. Hundreds, maybe more. Most of them successful. Most of them quiet. And no one writes that down. No one asks you to lecture in town halls or advise noblewomen. You're not invited to share what you know. But the barber surgeon, who's helped at maybe 3 births and botched 2 of them, he's treated like an authority because he wears a coat, because he has a beard, because he's a man. What they don't understand, or don't care to, is that childbirth is more art than science, more patience than action. It takes stillness, intuition, and the ability to sit beside someone for hours without panicking. These men are trained to cut, to fix, to dominate. They don't know how to wait. They don't know how to coax. They treat every birth like a crisis, even when it isn't. And when they create the crisis themselves, they blame the nearest woman. Sometimes they bring their own assistants, young men with big eyes and bigger egos, eager to impress their master by correcting you. They handle your herbs like they're poison, your tools like they're toys. They ask if you even know what a uterus looks like, as if you haven't held one in your hands, torn and trembling. You smile politely and say nothing, because correcting them doesn't earn respect, it earns retribution. There was a time you tried to work with them. You thought maybe they could be allies, maybe their blades and your hands could work together. But that fantasy died quickly. The first time a woman died while you were both in the room, he told the priest you gave her the wrong herbs. Never mind that he forced the birth before the mother was ready. Never mind that he snapped the baby's arm with his forceps. He left out those details, and no one questioned him. You've been told to step aside for the real expert. You've been pushed away from the mother you'd been tending to for hours. You've watched her eyes widen in panic as the man with the knife leaned in. And then when the worst happened, when she bled, when she tore, when she died, they turned to you and asked why you didn't do more, as if you hadn't tried, as if they hadn't shoved you out of the way, and you're expected to be gracious, to thank them for their help, to defer, to nod along when they describe the birth as if you weren't there. Because if you don't, you're the one with the attitude. You're the one who's dangerous. You're the one who needs to be watched. They can be loud, arrogant, and wrong. You have to be quiet, humble, and right, or at least invisible. Sometimes the families believe you. Sometimes they look at the barber surgeon and see him for what he is, a man who got lucky more often than skilled. But more often, they believe the man with the title. They believe the one who carries a book, the one who quotes scripture, or Latin, or a letter from some university they've never visited. They believe the one who walks in clean and leaves bloodied, rather than the one who arrived bloodied and left in silence. And yet, you keep showing up, because sometimes they don't call the barber surgeon. Sometimes they trust you. And when they do, the birth goes better, quieter, less brutal. You don't slice unless there's no other way. You don't force when nature can finish the job. You stay when the pain gets worse. You hold hands, not scalpels. You listen. But the difference is when you succeed, it vanishes. No headlines, no acclaim, just a tired mother, a screaming baby, and a village that forgets by morning. And when he succeeds, if he ever does, It becomes legend, a miracle attributed to knowledge you'll never be allowed to share. So yes, you bleed, you ache, you bury the dead and mourn the living. But he gets the credit, he gets the applause, he gets to fail loudly and be forgiven. You fail quietly and get burned. You start to age before your time. Not in ways people notice at first, not the grey hairs tucked beneath your kerchief, not the deepening lines at the corners of your eyes, but in the way you move, the way you breathe, the way your body starts to carry itself like it's always bracing for something bad. Because it is. You walk like someone expecting bad news. You sleep like someone ready to be woken. And you wake like someone who never truly rested in the first place. Your hands are never soft. The skin is rough and thick, especially around the fingers. Years of gripping slippery babies, of twisting soaked linens, of digging into the earth for herbs with no tool but your nails. It's all there in the calluses. Your knuckles are always cracked. Your wrists ache in the cold. You keep wrapping them with strips of cloth, but it doesn't help much. Every joint protests now when you squat beside a low bed, when you bend to check the baby's position, when you try to lift a limp body from the blood-soaked floor. You pretend it's nothing. You have to. No one wants a midwife who looks like she's close to falling apart. Your knees are worse. All that kneeling, crouching, shifting between stone floors and straw pallets. It adds up. Some mornings you can barely stand. Your joints click when you move. You stretch in awkward ways to make the pain tolerable, hoping no one notices. You can't afford to show weakness. The older you get, the more suspicious people become. They think wisdom lives in old age, but only if it comes with smooth hands and steady steps. Limp and suddenly you're a liability. Cough and they whisper about curses. Then sleep, when it comes at all, is broken and shallow. You lie awake long after the fires burned low, staring at the ceiling while the ghosts of old births creep through your thoughts. You remember the girl who bled out while clutching your hand. The baby that never moved, its mouth open and silent. The woman who screamed for her mother right before she died. And the mother who had been dead for years. These memories don't fade. They layer one over the other, pressing down on your chest until every breath feels like a confession. You try to eat when you can, but hunger is a strange companion now. Sometimes you forget meals entirely. Other times you find yourself chewing bread with no memory of how it got into your hand. You live on whatever is available, thin soups, bits of salted meat, scraps of root vegetables, boiled until they taste like nothing. Sometimes a family you've helped gives you a proper meal, and you savour it like it might be your last. Because it might be. You never know when the knock on the door will come, when you'll be summoned to a birth that becomes a funeral, when you'll be blamed, or worse, your back aches constantly. The kind of ache that sits deep in the spine, more like a warning than a pain. You've carried too many women, bent too long over too many beds, slept too often in places not meant for sleeping. Sometimes you wake up with your body twisted from the way you curled on the floor. Sometimes you wake up to someone screaming, not in the room, just in your memory. You sleep lightly because your life depends on it. Miss a cry, miss a sign, miss a single crucial second, and someone dies. You forget things too, small things. The names of women you helped a few years ago, the details of certain herbs, whether you've already boiled the water or just meant to. You remember the important things, mostly, but even that's getting harder. Sometimes you stand in a room and can't remember what you came in to get. Sometimes you feel like there's something you're supposed to know, something life-saving, and it just won't come. It's a frightening thing to realise your mind might be slipping, not just because it's dangerous for others, but because it means your usefulness is running out. You don't laugh much anymore. When you do, it's brittle, the kind of laugh that doesn't reach your eyes. Usually, it comes in moments where the alternative is weeping, when a mother survives against the odds, when a baby opens its mouth and wails like it's cursing the world already. when a drunk father faints at the sight of blood and nearly knocks over the hearth. You chuckle dryly. You pretend to be amused, but the truth is humour left you years ago. Maybe you left it first. You've stopped celebrating success. There's no point. A safe birth is followed too often by a sick child. A healthy mother might fall ill within days. Every time you think you've won, something else finds a way to knock the breath from your chest. So you keep your head down. You accept the thanks when it comes. You leave quickly. You try not to get attached. It's easier that way. And yet, despite the wear and tear, you keep going. Because there's no other path. This work isn't something you can retire from. You're not a priest or a blacksmith or a noblewoman with a dowry. You don't get to rest. You don't get to hand your tools to someone else and walk away. If you stop, women suffer. If you stop, babies die. If you stop, the entire fragile balance you help maintain collapses. You've seen midwives vanish before they got old. Not from death, though, that happens too. From accusation, from exile, from shame. They aged fast like you. Some couldn't keep up with the pain. Some lost their nerve. Some just walked into the woods one day and never came back. You've thought about it, what it would be like to disappear, to leave the blood and blame behind. But then someone knocks on your door, and you go, because it's what you do. You age fast in this life. If you're lucky, you live long enough to feel every year settle into your bones. Most don't, most are forgotten. But you're still here, and you still go when they call, even if every step feels heavier than the last. You don't talk about the ones who vanished, not because you don't remember them, you do, but because saying their names feels like inviting something dark into the room. They were midwives once, like you. They walked the same muddy paths. They answered the same frantic knocks at night. They carried the same pouch of tools and herbs, wore the same blood-stained apron, and offered the same whispered reassurances to women who couldn't stop screaming. And then one day, they were gone. No goodbyes, no explanations, no graves. Sometimes it starts with a rumour. A baby dies unexpectedly. A mother develops a fever and doesn't recover. A husband sees something he doesn't understand and assumes the worst. Maybe someone dreams of a shadow at the bedside and wakes convinced it was an omen. You hear the whispers in the market, near the well, outside the church. She knew too much. She used the wrong herbs. She said something strange during the birth. The details are always vague, but the conclusion is always clear. Someone needs to pay. And if the midwife doesn't have powerful friends, she will. You've watched it unfold more than once. You've seen the way people start pulling away. Neighbours who used to wave now avert their eyes. Mothers who once praised your hands now cross themselves as you pass. The local priest gives a sermon that isn't about you, not by name, but the message is obvious. He talks about women with ungodly knowledge. He warns of those who speak over life and death without authority. He reminds everyone that Satan works quietly, through the hands of those we trust. And the congregation nods, some already turning in their minds to who might fit that description. It doesn't take much. One angry father, one grieving husband, one priest looking to make an example. That's all it takes to turn a respected midwife into a suspect, a witch, a danger. They might accuse her outright. They might drag her before a magistrate and demand answers to questions no one could possibly answer. Why did the baby die? Why did she light a candle in that corner? Why did she collect herbs under a full moon? But more often they don't bother with a trial. More often she simply disappears. Some flee before it gets that far. They see the signs, feel the shift in the air. They pack what little they have and vanish into the woods, or toward another village, hoping to start over where no one knows their face. But most don't. Most stay, clinging to the hope that reason will prevail. That the people they helped, the women whose babies they saved, the husbands who once thanked them through tears, will defend them. Sometimes they do, but not loudly enough, not when it counts. You remember one midwife who was particularly skilled, older, wise, the kind of woman who always knew what to do, even in the worst situations. She'd delivered hundreds of babies, maybe more, taught half the women in the village how to manage a fever, how to bind a torn perineum, how to coax milk when none would come. Then one day, a noble's daughter died in labour. The girl had been frail to begin with, malnourished and frightened, married off too young. But none of that mattered. The priest wanted someone to blame, and the midwife, who had done everything right and still lost her, was summoned. They said she used dark magic, that she murmured to spirits under her breath, that she had too many books in her home. You knew for a fact she couldn't read, but once a story like that takes hold, it doesn't need to be true, it just needs to feel true. She was taken away in the night, no trial, no procession, just gone. The next morning her door was open, her belongings scattered. Her birthing stool was left behind, splattered with dried blood, still warm from the fire she hadn't had time to put out. You never saw her again. Other times there's no drama, no public accusation, just silence. One day, a midwife stops answering her door. Her house stays dark. Her tools are found abandoned. People shrug, say she must have gone off on her own. Maybe she got tired. Maybe she wanted peace. But you know better. You know that vanishing is rarely voluntary. Not for women like you. Not in a world where the moment you stop being useful, you start being dangerous. And yet no one talks about them after they're gone. No one mentions their name. No one visits their homes. Their tools get passed down quietly, without acknowledgement. Their herbs are bundled into someone else's satchel. Their work is folded into yours. Their stories turned into vague warnings. Don't speak too boldly. Don't use that route. Don't stay too long at the bedside. Advice shaped by absence, by the memory of women who are no longer there to speak for themselves. You carry them with you anyway, in your hands, in the way you mix a tincture, the way you touch a labouring mother's shoulder. You remember the things they said, the things they didn't, the way their mouths tightened when the priest entered the room. You remember the sound of their laughter before it faded. You remember the fear in their eyes near the end. You promise yourself you won't forget, even if everyone else does. But there's a small voice, one that gets louder as the years go on, that whispers, it could be you. One mistake, one death, one accusation, and you'll vanish too. Your name won't be written down. Your grave won't be marked. Maybe someone will reuse your stool. Maybe someone will pick through your herbs. But the work will go on without you, and the world will not pause to mourn, just like it didn't for the others. You tell yourself it's enough to have tried, that the lives you saved matter, even if no one remembers who saved them. That being needed is better than being safe. But you still look over your shoulder when the wind shifts. You still wonder if this next birth, this next death, will be the one that makes you disappear. Because in this world, midwives don't retire, they vanish. They call you a saint for a moment, a miracle worker, a vessel of God's mercy. And the worst part, a tiny part of you still wants to believe it, still wants the bread offerings, the warm looks, the baby named after you. But praise in this world is a leash. It pulls you forward into the next nightmare, the next impossible task, the next death waiting to be blamed on your hands. It fills you with hope, just long enough to make the fall hurt more. One sick baby, one unexplained fever, one cough that turns wet and ends in a tiny body being buried at dusk. And suddenly, the miracle is undone. It doesn't matter that you weren't even there when the child fell ill. It doesn't matter that the mother fed him spoiled milk, or that the winter was cruel, or that the fever swept through the entire village. It matters only that you were the last one to touch him before he entered the world. And now that he's gone, so is their trust. They don't confront you, not at first. They murmur. They glance away when you pass. They pull their children a little closer. They stop inviting you to meals. Stop calling you dear. Stop thanking you for your service. You're not accused, not openly. but you are avoided, and silence in your line of work is often more dangerous than words. You've learned not to flinch when the praise comes, not because you don't crave it, but because you know it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to their relief, to their luck, to their need to believe someone is in control. The moment they no longer feel safe, that praise vanishes. You were never the saint, just the stand-in. The respect they give you is conditional. It depends on your usefulness, on your silence, on your ability to make miracles without ever taking credit for them. You are allowed to be skilled, but only if you're humble. You are allowed to save lives, but only if you don't remind anyone that you did. They want your help, not your voice. Your labour, not your presence. You are a tool, not a person. And when you forget that, when you allow yourself to feel even a flicker of pride, they remind you, harshly. You've seen it happen to others, midwives who believed the praise, who started wearing finer clothes, who allowed themselves to be seen. They walked through the market with their heads held high, and the whispers followed. Too proud, too confident, too much. And when one of their patients died, it was not an accident. It was retribution, arrogance punished. You've never forgotten that. So you stay small, you stay quiet, you accept the bread and the thanks, and then you go home and lock your door. And yet, you still care. That's the hardest part. Even after everything, after the betrayals, after the stares, after the endless suspicion, you still want to be trusted. You still feel warmth when a mother thanks you, when a child reaches for your hand, when a family tells you the baby is strong and healthy. You try not to let it in, but it does, and it hurts more each time it's taken away. Because every gift, every blessing, every kind word is balanced on a blade. One mistake, and it cuts. They don't remember the 10 births you saved. They remember the one that ended badly. And even that, they remember wrong. They remember you being cold, even if you stayed by the bed for hours. They remember you using strange herbs, even if they were ones you've used safely for years. They remember you refusing to pray, even if you led the entire room in prayer 3 times. Memory twists under the weight of grief and fear, and you are the nearest target. You live with this knowledge always. It shapes every choice you make. When to speak, when to stay silent, when to intervene, and when to stand back and let someone else take the risk. You walk a tightrope, stretched between love and hate, between reverence and rage. One wrong step, and you fall. And when you do, when you stumble, when something happens that you can't fix, no one catches you. No one says, she did her best. No one says, we've trusted her for years. They say, maybe we shouldn't have called her. They say, we heard rumours. They say, we should find someone else next time. You become the reason for every past sorrow, every future fear. All the trust drains away, and you're left standing where you've always stood. Alone. Still you keep going. Not because you crave their respect, but because someone has to show up. Someone has to stand in that room and catch the child. Someone has to care, even if no one else does. You do it not for praise, but because you can't imagine walking away while a woman screams and no one listens. But the irony never fades. You are revered until you're feared, praised until you're blamed. You carry life into the world and are treated like death. And every time you're thanked, you wonder how long it will last and how much it will cost you next time. No one will write your name in the town records. There will be no statue, no plaque nailed to the church wall, no song sung in your honour. At best, you'll be remembered for a generation, as a name whispered by a few women who once bled in your hands and survived. At worst, you'll be forgotten before the grass has time to grow over the shallow hole they dig for you, because that's what happens to women like you. You come and go with the seasons, carrying life in and out of the world, while leaving almost nothing behind. You won't get a proper grave, not the kind the priests bless with Latin words and solemn bells. If you're lucky, someone will mark the spot with a stone. If you're not, they'll bury you at the edge of a field, far from the chapel, in earth that remembers every drop of blood you knelt in, but none of the names. There won't be a sermon. Just a few muttered words, more out of obligation than love. The people you saved will be too busy tending to their new children, or mourning someone newer to death to stand in the rain over your bones. But you were there, again and again. When the screaming began, when the blood poured, when the fear crept in like fog through the door frame, you came. No matter the hour, no matter how tired, no matter how many bruises still ached from the last time. You showed up. You stood beside women when no one else would. You held hands, wiped brows, whispered prayers you half believed, and told them they could do it, even when you weren't sure they could. You watched the line between life and death blur. You saw it shift, ripple, retreat. And sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it took what it wanted, and you were the only one left to hold the silence that followed. You wrapped bodies in blankets. You cleaned up the blood. You told families you were sorry. You meant it. And then you walked home alone, carrying sorrow in your gut like a stone you could never quite pass. There was no glory in what you did, no recognition, no reward, only more work. The next birth, the next set of screams, the next moment when someone else's life would be placed into your shaking, exhausted hands. You never had the luxury of being overwhelmed. You didn't have time to mourn or process or rest. You kept going, even when your back gave out, even when your knees throbbed, even when your mind began to slip around the edges. Because if you didn't go, no one else would. And for all that, you were never quite enough. You knew it. They made sure you knew it. Every death was your failure. Every illness, your oversight. Every soul lost was somehow one you didn't save fast enough, skillfully enough, prayerfully enough. No one said it directly. They didn't need to. You saw it in their faces, in the space they gave you, in the way their voices quieted when you entered a room after a bad birth. Even when you did everything right, when you bled alongside them, fought for their lives with your bare hands, it wasn't enough to undo the ones you couldn't save. You bore it, because what else could you do? You weren't allowed to break. You weren't allowed to stop. You were expected to endure, to bend, not snap. And so you did. You endured the cold, the pain, the fear, the accusations. You endured the hypocrisy of being praised in one breath and condemned in the next. You endured watching women die who shouldn't have, and women survive who no longer wanted to. You endured watching the world go on like none of it mattered. And maybe, in the grand scheme of things, it didn't. Maybe the births you attended are already forgotten. Maybe the women you saved grew old and never told their children your name. Maybe your tools were thrown out, your home reclaimed by weeds, your name swallowed by the earth, like everything else in time. But you were there. You made a difference, even if no one noticed, even if no one remembers. You weren't perfect. You made mistakes. You had to guess, to improvise, to act on instinct in the moments when hesitation meant death. Sometimes your hands shook. Sometimes your voice cracked. Sometimes you ran out of answers long before you ran out of questions. But you never ran away. You stayed, even when it hurt, even when it cost you. That's what made you strong. Not success, not sanctity, but the refusal to abandon others in their most desperate, undignified moments. You stood in the worst places, in rooms soaked with fear and blood, with bodies torn and crying, with grief thick in the air, and you did what you could. You weren't a miracle, you weren't magic, but you were real, you were there, and that matters more than anyone wants to admit. Now it's over. The world will keep spinning without you. Babies will still be born, women will still scream, someone else will take your place, or not. Maybe no one will. Maybe the people you served will realise too late that someone has to kneel in the blood. But not you. Not anymore. You can rest now. No more knocks at midnight. No more decisions that determine who lives and who doesn't. No more pretending not to be afraid. You gave everything you had. You poured yourself into this work, until there was nothing left. That was always the ending. Not a triumphant retirement, not a comfortable old age, just an emptying out. You were a midwife, you were needed, you were used, you were discarded, and still you tried. Sleep now. The dust settles, the story ends, quietly, without fanfare, without justice, without redemption. But it ends with the truth. You did your best. It was never enough, but it mattered anyway. That brings us to the end of tonight's long vigil. Not a tale of triumph, but of endurance. If you're still awake, thank you for sitting with me in the quiet shadow of a life spent holding back the dark with bare hands. If you'd like early access to more softly spoken histories from the forgotten corners of the past, along with perks like ad-free audio and behind-the-scenes updates, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment about when you think you would have walked away. After the first death, the first accusation, or not at all. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find their way to these stories. Sleep well.